Hello, everyone, and welcome to our policy dialogue today on EU-Japan connectivity and pandemic resilience in the Indo-Pacific. My name is Shada Islam. I'm Senior Advisor at EPC, and I'm delighted to moderate this discussion. Friends, it's been 4 weeks since Russia invaded Ukraine, starting a war with devastating consequences for Ukraine, for Europe, and for the world. This comes on top of the devastating impact of the COVID-19 health crisis on the global economy, on global health, and on our societies. Coping with such sudden changes and geopolitical tensions and conflicts requires resilience and fortitude. It also requires that responsible actors like Japan and the European Union step up their cooperation on issues of common interest. Japan and the EU are doing so. They have reaffirmed their strong commitment to the rules-based international order, to open trade, to tackling climate change, and to reinforcing multilateral security arrangements. Japan and the EU share an interest in building resilient and diversified global supply chains. They support affordable and equitable access to COVID-19 vaccines and are committed to working towards the expansion of vaccine production. They want discussions on an international treaty on pandemics within the WHO framework. There is also an EU-Japan partnership on sustainable connectivity and quality infrastructure, and both also share the goal of ensuring a free and open Indo-Pacific, which is based on the rule of law, inclusion, and democratic values. Joining us today to discuss these and other issues are Ambassador Romana Vlahutin, Ambassador at Large for Connectivity for the European Union. Ambassador Keiichi Katakami is Chair of the Institute for International Economic Studies. Delighted to have both of you here. Professor Aki Tonami is Associate Professor at the University of Tsukuba, and Bart Gaens is Adjunct Professor, University of Helsinki, and Lead Researcher at the Finnish Institute of International Affairs. Some housekeeping rules. I will speak to the panelists for about 35 to 40 minutes and then take questions from all participants. Please put your questions in the Q&A box on your screen. Now, without further ado, I'd like to give the floor to Ambassador Vlahutin, please. Screen is yours, Ambassador.
Good morning. Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be in such a wonderful group of colleagues to discuss what I believe is one of the essential topics of our time, and that is connectivity. We are indeed having this conversation in completely different environment than it would have taken place even, I would say, 2 months ago, because we thought that the pandemic crisis was a major disruptive one, but it turns out that we are facing successive crises. And I think all of them have proved, unfortunately, also that when we talk about connectivity or strategic infrastructure, we're not talking only about economic and social growth, but we are primarily talking about security. So this is my first premise. Connectivity is fundamentally also a security issue. We're talking about health security now, food security, energy security, digital security. Strategic infrastructure creates new maps. Strategic infrastructure creates a strategic environment within which we operate. It creates trade routes, it creates value chains, and these interdependencies need better understanding, they need mapping, and they need management that is based on rules and norms that is also fit for purpose. So it really, I think, is important that we start talking about connectivity from its sort of fundamentally important element, and that is a security one. This brings me to the second point. My second point is that connectivity, in essence, is values-based proposition. We're not talking only about things. We are not talking about strategic infrastructure in terms of just highways or ports or energy grids. There is the whole system of rules and norms that are equally important as physical infrastructure, and the close cooperation of like-minded partners is essential. And I think it needs to be focused on helping countries that don't only achieve economic growth, but also resilience and competitiveness. This has to be the general aim of what we are doing. And it then brings me to the third part and the importance, true importance of EU-Japan strategic partnership. I was watching some news from the summits, from the historical summits yesterday, and I had a feel when I saw photos of Prime Minister of Japan with European and American leaders that Japan somehow also is a Euro-Atlantic power. That in that sense, European Union is becoming part of the Indo-Pacific power structure. This is an incredibly important movement, and we need to use by far for the best all elements that it provides to us. European Union and Japan have signed a connectivity partnership in 2019, and 2 years or 2.5 years from it, I believe it needs to be scaled up. What is clear is there is political will. There is convergence of principles. There's a lot of coordination based on our policies of green and digital twin transition. But we also should model this partnership through high impact concrete projects. I really believe that we need to look at the opportunities out there. We need to identify what and how. And one thing that I have learned through the experience of working on this partnership is that we also need to think about the new generation of instruments. So the new generation of infrastructure would require also instruments that are fit for purpose. We need to see this as a marathon. This is not a sprint. This is something that is long-term structural strategic change, and we have to be also equipped with all the important instruments that need for it. But what is, and with this I will finish my introduction, what is of critical importance is that we do have a key commodity there, and that is trust.
Thank you very much indeed, Romana. So talking about connectivity being security, all the elements of security, health, food, digital, energy, the importance of values-based connectivity, EU-Japan partnership being stronger than ever. And I think that's a very good point there about scaling up the connectivity partnership through projects. And I think I'll come back to you in our second round to kind of explain what kind of projects you think we could be engaging in together and where. I would imagine that Africa would be one destination where we could be working together. Thank you very much indeed for that. Katakami-san, if I could give you the floor for your points of view as well, please.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me for today's public policy dialogue. Honored and privileged to be here today. I'd like to make a brief remarks on 2 points. The first, about free and open Indo-Pacific vision and connectivity, and then about EU's untapped opportunity in the Indo-Pacific region. The vision of free and open Indo-Pacific is by combining 2 continents, Asia that is rapidly growing and Africa that possesses huge potential of growth, and 2 oceans, Pacific Ocean and Indian Ocean, bring about peace, stability, and prosperity across the region through establishing a free and open order based on the shared value and principles such as rule of law. The vision has 3 pillars. 1, promotion and establishment of the rule of law, freedom of navigation, and free trade. 2, pursuit of economic prosperity through improving physical, institutional, and people-to-people connectivity and strengthening economic partnership. 3, commitment for peace and stability through capacity building and etc. Nothing like aiming something similar to NATO in Asia, as some country puts it. I'm pleased to note that the importance of free and open Indo-Pacific has been, since proposing 2016, recognized, accepted, and bolstered by countries around the world. EU, through Connectivity Strategy for Asia in 2018, Indo-Pacific Strategy in 2021, UK, France, Germany, and Netherlands, has also announced their own strategy. US, through Comprehensive Indo-Pacific Strategy expressed in February this year. ASEAN, through AOIP, ASEAN Outlook on the Indo-Pacific, and India, Australia, New Zealand, and Canada as well. Connectivity is not just physical infrastructure, such as roads and ports. On land, in the sea, in the sky, space, and cyberspace, people, capital, and goods are all on the move, with knowledge and information darting intensively about. It is encouraging to note that various initiatives are taking place in the Indo-Pacific region. For example, under Japan-EU Connectivity Partnership of 2019 in the area of digital, energy, transport, and people-to-people connectivity. Under Japan-US Clean Energy Partnership, as well as Global Digital Connectivity Partnership. Also under recent new initiatives such as EU Global Gateway targeting 300 billion euro, and US B3W, Build Back Better World project targeting $40 billion. Japan and EU, sharing unwavering commitment to fundamental values, are able to engender connectivity that is not merely connecting things, but rather connecting things well, to build sustainable, comprehensive, and rules-based connectivity from Indo-Pacific to the Western Balkans and Africa. 3 observations. There exists enough platform or forum, if I may say so. What we need now is, 1, while pandemic has slowed down the process, it's important to come up with as many tangible results as possible and to lead by example. 2, seek synergy, not necessary to coordinate among different initiatives. 3, importance must be attached to field-based, not headquarter-based coordination. A better connected EU and Asia through transport links, energy, human and digital networks will strengthen the resilience of society and regions, facilitate trade, promote the rule-based international order, and create avenue for a more sustainable, low-carbon future. This is why I would like to see more engaged EU in this region. My wish lists are as follows. The EU association with a revitalized Quad, which is now promoting cooperation in such fields as health, security, COVID-19 response measure, infrastructure, and climate change. The EU association with the US-led IPEF, Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, to be negotiated in 2022, covering digital economy, supply chain, high standard infrastructure. And the EU joining CPTPP. As accession process is not based on first come, first base, early accession of the EU is another remote possibility. There's RCEP in force, but I think it's too low a level of ambition for the EU. On one final point, although the security environments are different in Europe and Asia, in a more globalized and interlinked world, each of these 2 regions is affected by and can affect developments beyond its border. Any attempt to unilaterally change the status quo by force, as we observed in the Russian aggression in Ukraine today, must not be tolerated, and that it is precisely because of this situation that it is critical to further promote efforts towards the realization of a free and open Indo-Pacific. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Ambassador. Thank you very much indeed. And you're talking about getting tangible results, which is a bit what Romana has talked about as well, about doing something together, really proving that, walking the talk, as it were. And very interesting also talking about synergies between the different global strategies on connectivity. And I think that also is something that we need to start talking about, global governance in terms of connectivity projects, to get some norms and standards which are acceptable for everyone. Interesting proposition as also, Ambassador, association with Quad. I note the word association, and also joining the CPTPP. I think these are very interesting initiatives that the EU could take, and I think there is quite a lot of reflection going on in within the European Union. Romana can perhaps tell us a little bit about that, on joining these two very important, let's say, developments in the Indo-Pacific. May I ask the audience also, all the participants, to start asking some questions in the Q&A box, and I will put them to the panelists as soon as possible. So let me turn now to Professor Tonami as well. Let's get your point of view, Professor, on what's happening in EU-Japan relations, connectivity, and the Indo-Pacific.
Thank you again for EPC for this wonderful invitation to talk about connectivity between the partnership on EU-Japan connectivity, as well as health in Indo-Pacific. I'm an academic, so I'm not going to beat around the bushes. So I know that for EU, working with Japan has not been necessarily straightforward. And then I guess this feeling that probably has been mutual for the last few decades. And one thing I would perhaps like to point out that how Japan views connectivity or infrastructure. And this is kind of in principle based on this understanding of economics. Infrastructure, whether it's internet or freeways, improves the functioning of an economy. And Japan, as a construction state, it uses its experience of rapid economic development in the post-Second World War period, which actually led to unique principles and characteristics of how Japan views infrastructure development in Japan and outside of Japan. And then Japan regards keys to economic growth. Of course, along the way, there are a few tweaks here and there, but I still believe that these principle remains the same. And Japan regards keys to economic growth as infrastructure development, large-scale projects, government-led growth schemes, and the use of loans rather than grants. So when it comes to tangible actions based on the partnership between EU and Japan, I think, in fact, the partnership on sustainable connectivity and quality infrastructure between Japan and the European Union is very much norm-based. It's about suggesting code of conduct. So when it comes down to actual tangible results, the EU side perhaps need to take into consideration of these four guiding principle of Japanese attitude towards infrastructure. And it's a big question whether EU is ready to, in a way, take this kind of a very much government-led approach when it comes to development aid or infrastructure development or connectivity. Second point I would like to highlight is actually the dark side of connectivity. So according to Leonard, the act of linking people together does not always lead to conflict, but linking people can trigger reactions that make conflict more likely. So this actually resonates with what the ambassador Romana mentioned earlier about security. So COVID-19 or pandemic that we have experienced until just recently, or we are still experiencing right now, is actually a prime example of connectivity being weaponized. So when EU and Japan together would like to address pandemic resilience, how can we actually do it? And again, the partnership on sustainable connectivity and quality infrastructure is very much norm-based. So without too much precautions as to the dark or negative side of connectivity. How can we apply this partnership into pandemic resilience? For example, is there a level playing field for European pharmaceutical companies in Japan or Japanese pharmaceutical companies in Europe, vice versa? Or if you recall, there was some avoidance of certain vaccines from particular country in Europe, which also relates to the scientific misinformation. And that's also the negative side of connectivity. Or how do we coordinate travel restrictions, which is very much also dependent on citizens, in a way, awareness of what they regard as safe or secured. So these are small but important questions that need to be addressed when we talk about sustainability, because indeed connectivities can bring people a little bit concerned. So that's something that is not necessarily the positive of the partnership, but it's definitely something that should be taken into consideration. Now I'll end my remarks there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. Thank you for pointing out also that there are some, let's say, practical problems and difficulties that have to be overcome if we are actually going to start working together on connectivity projects. Japan's government-led approach, as you said, also you pointed out to the dark side of connectivity, and I think obviously COVID-19, but also other areas, cyber harassment, if you like, and fake news, disinformation, which we are seeing a plethora of at the moment, of course, because of the war, and also the need to coordinate on a global scale on measures to combat health issues, including pandemics. Thank you very much indeed for that. And I think you've also mentioned indirectly the elephant in the room when we talk about the Indo-Pacific connectivity EU-Japan partnership, which is of course China and its growing importance that is very, very evident across the globe, but especially of course in the Indo-Pacific. But let me turn to you now. Let's get your viewpoints as well, and then we'll go for a second round. Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Shada. Good morning, everybody. Just two short general remarks, one about the EU's connectivity strategy and one about the EU-Japan partnership in general. So first, as for the EU's connectivity strategy, I think that the 2018 document was quite a landmark document because it verbalized the EU's global strategy of 2 years before that mentioned that there should be a higher awareness in Europe of the importance of a connected Asia for European prosperity. So, and I think, like the ambassador already said, it had a very strong normative basis, focusing on sustainability, rules-based order, transparency, and so on. And I think it was also very clear that it had an implicit reference to the fact that the EU wanted to provide some kind of an alternative to the Chinese connectivity model. But I think that the strategy was quite strongly criticized for being vague, for lacking in substance, for not having a sellable brand, and for having a very shaky financial backbone, and that there was an absence, let's say, of concrete commitments. But I think that the latest Global Gateway policy document successfully addresses at least most of these issues. It does provide a sellable brand that can explain Europe's connectivity approaches. It has still a very strong ethical and sustainable basis or emphasis. It adds substance in areas like digital, climate, transport, health, and education. And it also adds more clarity on the financing through the so-called Team Europe approach. So the EU institutions, member states, financial institutions, and also the private sector involved there. But of course, like was already mentioned, the proof of pudding will be in the eating. And I think here the Global Gateway Africa-Europe investment package of 150 billion that was promised last month will be a first test case for the Global Gateway, and that will then hopefully also see some extension towards Asia. And then I think a second marker of success would be to what extent the EU will be able to cooperate or at least coordinate closer with like-minded partners like Japan in other regions, including Southeast Asia, but also including Africa, for example. Then secondly, a very general remark about the EU-Japan partnership. I think that the two partners have converged quite a lot since 2017, because you can see that the relations have moved from a very under-delivering partnership that was very pragmatic, ad hoc, issue-led based, to a much more substantial and comprehensive strategic partnership that also has resulted in the EPA SPA in 2017. And I think this is due to, well, numerous factors, including Donald Trump's transactionalism that resulted in a crisis of transatlantic ties. There was a feeling that was shared by both the EU and Japan that they could be less reassured of being able to rely on the US. There was the rise of unilateral arrangements like AUKUS, whereby the EU was sidelined. The US-China trade war. There was, of course, the pandemic that made both partners realize the need to build more resilient supply chains. And finally, I think also the Ukraine crisis at the moment is driving Japan further away from Russia towards perhaps more reliable, more like-minded partners, in spite of all the issues, the unresolved issues that Japan has with Russia. So I think for all these reasons, the Japan-EU partnership has been gathering quite a lot of strength, I think, which has led to both normative convergence and also more cooperation on the ground. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Bart. Yes, indeed. I mean, people like you and I who've been following EU's Asia relations have seen this uptick in cooperation with Japan starting under Donald Trump, as you said, and I think getting stronger as during the pandemic as well. And now, of course, the war in Ukraine also makes it very necessary that we work together on issues to do with rules-based order. Thank you very much indeed for that. So I have a question that has come in from Emily Steiger, and she asks, which opportunities do you see in the G7 formulated Global Gateway Initiative for the future of the EU-Japanese strategic partnership? So when I ask you the following question, Romana and everyone else, please do take this into account as well. There's interest in the G7 initiative as well, which I think is also called Build Back Better, if I'm not mistaken. Yes. So just the question I would have is, we've talked now, let's say we set the broad canvas about how EU and Japan are working together. There's an improvement in ties. There's some practical problems, of course, as Professor Tonami has pointed out, but the will is there. Now let's see how the will translates into practical measures. Romana, you said there is room for upgrading. There's room for more impactful, let's say, examples, high impact projects that could be launched by the EU and Japan. So if you could elaborate a bit further on that, I'd appreciate it.
Thanks a lot, and it's been very interesting listening to my colleagues on the panel. I think we are all saying more or less the same thing, maybe a bit from a different angle or with different words, but I think we all understand in general the importance of this with same elements. I would focus on two things. One thing that Ambassador Katakami mentioned, and another one that Professor Tonami mentioned. When we talk about concrete, I fully agree that we need to do field-based coordination. I think we need to go down to the field on the regional level. It is really important to look at it from the regional perspective, not one country at a time, but look at the space in a more integrated way and see how we can really boost up both the growth and resilience. And one major novelty in our relationship or our coordination on connectivity that has been marked in our partnership is our engagement in third countries and regions. So we have agreed to work together in the Indo-Pacific, in Africa, in Central Europe, in Central Asia, in Eastern Partnership and Western Balkans. And this was a very important discussion for us because, you know, of course, Japan knows its neighborhood much better than we might do. We know our own neighborhood much better than Japan may do. But I think there is a lot that we can do in each other neighborhoods, and it is really important for us. We are doing some deep research into how Japan also can work with us in the Western Balkans, how Japan can work with us in the Eastern Partnership countries, and how we can work together in Central Asia that will need a lot of investment when it comes to infrastructure. So I fully agree with this, and this is exactly what we are now looking into, as I said, more deeper. And the second thing is what Professor Tonami said, and comes from Japanese experience. I think actually the situation in Europe is pretty similar in that sense, from the experience point of view. You know, European Union was created through connectivity. I mean, connectivity is the logic of European Union. However, working in third countries and regions will require for us to sort of reassess the set of instruments and see what works best. There are, because these are mostly countries in development, we have, I fully agree on the large scale. I think it is crucial to have impact that has meaning. This is how you model things. But on government led and on loans, I think we need to pause and discuss, because first, it's such a market in a way. The needs are massive, and the needs are such that there is no simply public funding anywhere to cater for the needs that are out there. And we have to be very observant of also the fact, you know, bankable projects will always get financing, but we have to look at the projects that are of crucial importance, but not yet fully bankable. And this is where I think we need to come and assist and help the private investment through a combination of instruments, and grants do come into that combination. Guarantee facilities do come into that combination, and Global Gateway in its listing of instruments and tools bases its action of EFSD+, which is a guarantee facility that is there to rebalance the risks for the private investment. I think we really need partnership with the private sector. We are reaching out to private sector in Europe. We are reaching out to private sector in Japan. I think we also need to create a relation of trust, in the sense that private sector needs to trust us on this for this endeavor. But in that sense, as what I said, that we need a new generation of instruments in a way, or we have to use the instruments that we already have, maybe in a more even practical way. This is not time for too much bureaucracy. we all have to move, and I think the crisis in Ukraine and again this incredible plethora of summits in Brussels yesterday and today proves that. And let me then finish with G7. There is a lot of discussion on connectivity and strategic infrastructure within G7. Build Back Better is American approach to connectivity. It's sort of their brand. Global Gateway is European. Quality infrastructure is Japanese, but they are all with very similar or same building elements. And this is where discussion and coordination is ongoing. As you may imagine, this is a massive amount of strength. If you want financial, regulatory, technological, and I think this is really the good way to go.
Thank you, Romana. So I'm going to do a little self-promotion along with Bart. Bart, I and a Singaporean colleague, Lei Hui, have written a piece saying that what we really need are multilateral rules that, you know, you've talked about Global Gateway, Build Back Better. There is also the Belt and Road. Let's not deny the existence of this massive project. And everyone's working, saying more or less the same thing, except of course BRI, but not working together, not synergizing. There's no real norms-based code of conduct in a sense. And we wrote something for the East Asia Forum, I think, Bart, it was about 3 months ago, saying this is really the moment to start thinking about having informal perhaps to start off with, but really some rules that at least so-called like-minded countries can start working together on. And I think I'd like to put that question to you, Ambassador Katakami, because you did mention synergies, and I want to take you a little bit further down the road and to talk about how these synergies can actually manifest themselves. And to all participants, please do keep your questions coming in. Ambassador.
Well, thank you very much. I'm away from the government right now, so I don't know how actually things are going on. But as has been discussed, yes, we have Global Gateway in Euroside, and we have B3W Build Back Better program of the US, and we do have one quality infrastructure project. And one important thing is, as I mentioned, we don't need to coordinate, that will make things very difficult from pragmatic point of view. Seeking synergy, meaning that at least we share the information, what we are going to do, and sometimes we share the best practices we have, and at least to avoid redundancy in our project. That's something that I hope it's already taken place, but something that it must be taking place so as to avoid any redundancy and everything. Just 2 points, maybe apart from your question, but one is about the BRI. Yes, officially we are talking about, we are presenting through this connectivity program, the alternative to the BRI. We are not forcing anything. It's just an alternative based on value and based on sustainability, environment friendly, etc., etc. And we also made it clear that and the BRI project per se is changing based on various international criticism. And if BRI project per se is based on our own value, I mean, then we can coordinate with them, cooperate with them as well. It's not just that we are fighting against BRI kind of things. And another thing is there's a security things. One of my friends, when I was preparing for this seminar, gave me one document talking about Japan-EU kind of a cooperation project of the connectivity, which is in Romania. It's about the bridge connecting Romania and Moldova. Now, what's happening in Ukraine and Georgia, Moldova, and all those things, this kind of cooperation between Japan and EU also has some security implication as well. So these are the things that we can pursue in the future as well. Thank you, I'll stop here.
I was muted, sorry. Thank you very much, Ambassador Katakami. So let me turn to you, Professor Tonami, as well, and ask you the same question about perhaps working better together. And what Bart and I had suggested in our piece was that actually we have a very good format where this could be done, which is the Asia-Europe meeting, ASEM. Which is a multilateral meeting. It brings European and Asian countries together on multiple levels, multiple layers, and has all kinds of offers all kinds of opportunities for discussion. In fact, the discussion on connectivity has started there. So perhaps your opinions on whether this is a feasibility taking forward, and Bart, I'd like you to come in as well afterwards. So please, Professor.
Thank you. Well, it was a difficult question to answer. I was wondering, I am kind of in agreement with Ambassador Katakami in the sense that perhaps there's less need to coordinate. Rather, there's perhaps we should start by sharing information, because I think maybe the EU and Japan, and to an extent the United States, should focus on what we do best rather than trying to be similar with each other. And if I talk about EU and Japan, EU is definitely much better prepared, as well as have a long track record of rule making and norm making, whereas I think Japan probably does slightly better in actually building things. Of course, I'm sure there are lots of European companies that do the construction of connectivity related infrastructure, just as Japanese companies do. But I think Japanese aid history also considered, perhaps maybe we should focus on what we do best rather than trying to be similar with each other. And related to this, one thing that I think Japan finds always quite difficult to deal with private sector is that the way that Japan has done is that the government would provide government-funded large-scale projects to, provide private companies to with opportunity to invest in, let's say, one of the Southeast Asian countries, and that has, in a way, acted as an incentive for private companies, which are in general are much happier in a way in investing in Japan rather than abroad. So there comes the idea of quality infrastructure, whereas that we don't need to Japanese companies don't need to provide cheap infrastructure. We'll give them best quality. It might be expensive, but best quality and trustworthy. And when that, in a way, kudos is taken away from Japanese overseas infrastructure development projects, what's going to be left? Can we make do with cheap and cheerful, but sustainable enough? And maybe the recipients of these investments will be much happier than receiving high-speed railways. For example, those are the questions that we need to think about in planning ahead to think about where we can actually come up with a tangible project.
Thank you very much, because it requires also listening to the, I hate the word, but beneficiaries, or those who will be actually getting those projects, means listening to their concerns as well and responding in tangent with what they're saying. Exactly. Thank you very much. Bart, may I turn to you?
Yes, I would agree with the previous speakers in saying that well, cooperation between all these different connectivity models is really very hard, and that is already quite valuable if it would be possible to share expertise and ideas and finding some synergies and some possible future opportunities to co-invest, for example, because there is not just the Build Back Better world, which was a US idea that was then taken or supported by the G7. There's also all the other connectivity models and plans, like the ASEAN connectivity plan. There is Japan's own quality infrastructure investment idea. There's also the cooperation between, or the planned cooperation at least, between Japan and India, the Asia-Africa growth corridor. And maybe the latter is a good example of how difficult it is to actually turn these very good ideas and synergies that are obviously there, because they are there on paper, to implement them on the ground in Asia as well as in Africa, cooperating between Japan and India. So it would be already quite good to find some synergies and coordinate and find some future investment or co-investment opportunities. And maybe here, the cooperation between the European Investment Bank and the MOU that it has with Japanese institutions like JICA, the Japan International Cooperation Agency. There's others, the Japan Bank for International Cooperation. So these have been cooperating since 2018, and the memorandum has been extended just last year. So there is work ongoing there between the EU and Japan that can be seen as a good example of how to take things forward. I agree with you, Shada, on ASEM, that ASEM is actually a very good venue to address all these issues, also because it has been called the home of connectivity. And if you think about concrete examples like in the field of health, there have been already some successful initiatives there. Actually, one of them was started already in 2009 on the occasion of the influenza A pandemic. There was the ASEM initiative for the rapid containment of pandemic influenza, actually a Japanese initiative that was then implemented by the Asia-Europe Foundation. And that has then also proven useful during the most recent COVID-19 pandemic, in which some Asian partners benefited from this stockpile of personal protective equipment that was a part of this ASEM initiative. And also in terms of dialogue in, for example, health or pandemic resilience, ASEM is a very good forum because it is in the end mainly about dialogue.
You're absolutely right, Bart, to bring that up, because it is true that Japan has taken the lead within ASEM and ASEF as well on health-connected issues, and for a long time now. So I would like Professor Tonami and Katakami to think about how we can now, post-COVID, take that forward. And to come to you, Ambassador Romana, as well, in terms of supply chains connectivity, I mean, all of this was made the need to make them more effective, more resilient. There was also discussion of onshoring, reshoring, and of course, the war in Ukraine has made also these questions very, very relevant for us today. So I was just wondering, in terms of connectivity, global supply chains, making ourselves perhaps more reliant and more resilient, we are in a very, very volatile environment at the moment. So are your projects, are your initiatives sort of keeping up with the changing times, with the challenging times that we have at the moment?
This is a crucial piece of the mix. But if you first allow me to maybe just reflect on something that was said, three things. First, there already is a set of multilateral rules when it comes to infrastructure, and it's G20 quality infrastructure voluntary principles. Mm-hmm. But the problem is they're voluntary. So there is no mechanism of enforcement, and there is no sort of ability to measure against a certain set of standards in a way that would make sure that there is constant progress on the standard base. So what we need to think about is how to make, if you wish, additional financing or support, even contingent on projects being in line with G20 principles. Also for the European Union, at least when it comes to everything linked to the environment, these principles might be not developed enough. EIB's rules for engagement when it comes to energy projects is already much higher than what is there in the G20 principles. So there is work to be there for sure. I would like to really bold and underscore what Ambassador Katakami said. Our work is based on two key principles: it's sustainability and level playing field. And whoever can contribute is welcomed. In that sense, there is so much need for infrastructure, but it's a need for sustainable and quality infrastructure. So it's an it's an invitation for everyone who can contribute. And then finally, it was very interesting for me to listen about the phrasing on synergies and best practices and focusing on what we do best. I fully and absolutely agree. But I think we have already actually moved one step forward. And when you talk to European businesses, for example, that are present in Japan, there was a very important opinion poll among German businesses who said around 70% of them said that they are in Japan not for the Japanese market, but for joint ventures with Japanese private companies in third markets. This is a trend that is not only good, it's needed. And I think this is a trend that we really want to support. And here also comes, Shada, your notion, and again, I fully agree with it, that we have to listen to countries that have these needs for the new infrastructure. And it's simply a fact that in some of them, the situation is such that projects are, they come with an element of risk. And it's our job to make a decision whether this risk is worth taking and how do we cater for it. Because we are in a very unique moment of energy and digital twin transition. For developing countries, this is a major opportunity. Really, especially with digital, if you wish, it can help them jump a generation of development. If we lose this moment and this capacity to support that kind of jump, we may also unfortunately lose a generation of development. And that would be a terrible division. And this is what I even believe, can't afford. And I will finish now with global supply chains. I think this was, into our face during the pandemics. It's also, unfortunately, again, into our face with the Ukraine, with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, now on the food front and the food supply chains, etc. I think there is a lot of thinking and trying to understand how we overcome this. A lot of it can be addressed through really looking at the trade routes and understanding this connectivity in a strategic way. But some of it will also have to be overcome through innovation, because there are value chains that are linked to certain providers where you can't, in a way, create an alternative or substitute unless you move up in terms of innovation and you create a new commodity that can be more resilient or brings more resilience into these value chains.
Thank you very much, Romana. So Ambassador Katakami, let me turn to you. We are coming towards the end of our hour. And I was just wondering if you could comment on some of the points that Ambassador Romana has made, but also perhaps indicate to us in terms of health and fighting, because we know pandemics are going to be a recurring phenomena. Unfortunately, we've been told that. And as Bart has said, Japan has taken the lead for several decades now, actually, of pushing the health agenda onto the ASEM format, if you like, but also beyond that. So I'd love to hear your views on that, please.
Thank you very much. Yes, Japan has been pushing forward basically like universal health coverage and all those things. There's vaccine things. I will not get into detail, but of course we have been cooperating with COVAX facility and also bilaterally for 4.2 million doses to various countries. But at the same time, we all know that as far as this pandemic is concerned, no one is safe until everyone is safe. And I see the recent economist saying that vaccine dose given per 100 people, high income country 193, while low-income countries 20. So there's a great discrepancy there. And I think G20 has a target of G20 and WHO has a target of at least have 70% of the world population being vaccinated by mid of this year. So we have to double down our efforts to further cooperate on this issue. Talking about supply chain, all those personal safety equipment and everything, yes, it is very important, but we cannot do everything by onshoring, or there's a term sometimes called friendshoring. It's based on trust. And that kind of thing is more pragmatic way to pursue this issue for preparing for the future pandemic or whatever. But at the same time, I feel that I might be saying too much, but if the government has to choose their own citizen or foreign citizen, then first priority comes to its own citizen, and that's a fact. And based on that fact, we have to think of how the supply chain, storage of vaccine, for all those things. But if you have trust, then you can trust each other when the time comes. That's different from having nothing at all in terms of like-minded countries. And that is very important aspect as well. Last, just 2 points. We haven't mentioned this, but one thing I'm concerned may be a too strong a term, but as Shada-san, you have mentioned, because of the Ukraine things, we are concerned that EU might be focused. Naturally, I understand, but priority goes to security, building new European security architecture, whatever. At the same time, as I mentioned, that's the last part of my opening, I think everything is interlinked, intertwined in this world. So I hope that EU still, focus that does not deviate from Indo-Pacific area to still keep on putting in importance on the Indo-Pacific region as well. Last point, I'm sorry for this, but today we didn't discuss, but I'm a little bit concerned about the climate change as well, because last winter we have this high rocketing price of coal, natural gas, and everything. And that comes from of course, the pent-up demand from the COVID, but also the bad weather. Now we have this Ukraine crisis, and we have another high rocketing or the energy issue coming up surface. So I just want to say that we should not jump into easy kind of solution like we need more coal. Look, we have to keep on our target of carbon neutral things and everything. I think that's the area, again, that Japan and EU can also work closely together. Sorry for taking too much time. I will stop here.
Not at all, Ambassador. You pointed to two very important phenomena. Absolutely. We are talking as though the world was still the way it was 4 weeks ago. Of course, all of our discussion about the connectivity, about the Green Deal, about health is being disrupted by this war. All of our assumptions about a peaceful Europe going forward are being disrupted by what we've seen. A new world order is perhaps emerging that we need to be very, very conscious of. And I think these are questions that EPC and all of us here in Brussels and in Tokyo will be looking ahead and trying to see how we navigate in these very troubled waters, what remains of some of our assumptions, and whether we need to rewrite some of the global rules that we have been talking about. So I think this is going to be an ongoing conversation, but thank you so much for bringing it up at this point as well, especially on questions of the Green Deal and climate change, food security. Romana has mentioned that as well. For your final points now, if I could go to you, Professor Tonami, and then I'll go to Bart as well, please.
Thank you. As a final remark, I very much appreciate the information that are shared by our colleagues, ambassadors, and Bart, Professor Gaens. And this has been a learning opportunity for me as well, Shada. And so I thank you for that. And what I would like to ask perhaps the EU or those who are related to EU is that perhaps maybe there's a bit of a boost in PR activities by the delegation of European Union to Japan, because there are, as all of you have pointed out, there are many success cases, but even I don't think is, I think I'm not, of course, as knowledgeable about EU, but I am probably one of the few academics working in Japan that has something to do with EU. So, and I'm not sure if there are many universities that has a program or a department dedicated to EU studies, for example, and then it is not an easy subject to study. EU is very difficult to understand. So that would be kind of a good way to maybe slow start, but to in a way gain more soft power or soft knowledge about EU, which is crucial to continue building the trust, mutual trust between EU and Japan. And that is actually also related to the unfortunate exit of the UK from EU, because for Japan, the UK has been the gateway to understand or to have conversation with the EU. But now that the UK is gone, I think, and then with delegation of European Union in Tokyo, not so much, at least present in vernacular conversation of Japanese people or Japanese media, creates a kind of a space that should be filled to move forward. So on that note, thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Aki-san. I think you made a very good point about academic exchanges and think tank exchanges. I mean, without that, you do not get change in policy, because you actually have to have people like us pushing the agenda. And I can assure you that we have been doing so, pushing the European Union, Asian agenda, Indo-Pacific agenda now, to make sure that the drive does not stall because of political constraints or economic constraints. And you've made a very good point. Let me go to Bart, and then I'd like you, Romana, just to respond to what Aki has said about the need to up our game as Europeans in the Indo-Pacific and in Japan specifically. Bart, please.
Okay, just two final points. First one is that I do think that the EU still has a role to play in the Indo-Pacific, in spite of the world being in turmoil. In particular, perhaps in Southeast Asia, in ASEAN, where the EU is actually very much in demand due to the ongoing China-US rivalry there. Many countries also being divided between the two. So I think, and that's also obvious from the recent opinion polls, the EU is very much wanted there as a supporter of the rules-based order, and also as a trusted partner, including, I think, in the realm of sustainable connectivity. And then secondly, I would agree with Ambassador Katakami of the importance of the continued fight against climate change. And perhaps here there are some hopes for the EU-Japan partnership, in particular the EU-Japan Green Alliance that was started in 2021, that aims to cooperate in well, energy transition, environmental protection, and so on. And perhaps there's quite a lot of potential for cooperation on the hydrogen economy, because I think both partners have to rely on that in order to achieve the carbon neutrality that they both set to reach by 2050. So cooperation in technology on hydrogen that is produced from renewable sources, for example, is one area where Japan and EU can further cooperate. So I think there is some potential for both partners to cooperate more there in the fight against climate change.
Thank you very much, Bart, also for bringing up ASEAN. I didn't have time to bring it up, but you're absolutely right. I mean, our relationship with ASEAN is very important. When we talk about the Indo-Pacific, we recognize ASEAN centrality, and I think Japan absolutely shares our knowledge and our relationship with ASEAN as well. relationship is, of course, very close, a very central partner for us in the Indo-Pacific, including on connectivity issues. Ambassador, if you'd like to respond to what Aki Tonami said, I'm willing to give you the floor.
Sure. But also, I have to ask Professor Ambassador Katakami, if I may quote him on friendshoring, I find it an excellent word for explaining exactly what we want to do and what I think is needed. And then to, I think, reassure everyone, everything is linked. And this is why at the very beginning, at the opening of my intervention, I said that I have a feeling that Japan is part of Euro-Atlantic community as much as European Union is a part of Indo-Pacific community. There is simply that dynamic now, and I think it's not going to go anyway. And everything is linked. I also personally believe, this is my personal analysis, that if things in Afghanistan didn't go that way, that the situation with Ukraine might have been different. Everything is linked, and we are part of one big sort of security or change of the way the world functions in terms of foreign and security elements. When it comes to energy and renewables, I think the German Minister of Economy said renewables are freedom. And I think it will not, for us, it will not be going back to coal, it will be moving forward to renewables. And you will see much more, and even probably much quicker, move than what could have been anticipated. And finally, on upping our game, absolutely. I think, I mean, there is massive respect for Japan and for Japanese culture in European societies. And I think what is needed really is much more exchanges between youth, between our students, between our professionals, between our experts. This is something that is absolutely worth investing, because a type of leadership programs for the youth, everything that will bring us into discussions like this one. I have a feeling that we could go on with this very discussion for hours now to go into the details of it, but very much needed, and point taken on the PR part. Absolutely agree.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed to all four of you for a very wide-ranging but also very fascinating and in-depth discussion. I think in 75 minutes we've covered a lot of ground to do with EU-Japan relationship, the partnership that all of you have pointed to as a growing one, as a becoming more and more intimate, becoming more and more practical as well, I hope. And we have seen this evolution and watched it with, I have to say, a great deal of hope. And as I said to start off with, we live in very volatile times. It's important that we stay connected. It's important that we keep our discussions open, because I fear that as we go forward in this post-COVID-19 world, and once the war, I hope, soon ends, we will have to sit together and work out how we're going to live in this new changed world that will be with us and be there for our children and our grandchildren as well. So that's the time, I think, Professor Katakami, Ambassador, that we will all need to sit, because you are so wise. You come across as a professor and an ambassador. So that will be the time that I think countries like ours will have to get together. But I would have to insist on this, because I think it's very important. It's not just the like-minded that we need to sit together. We also need to sit together with those who do not agree with us, because this world is a big place, a very challenging place, and we have to work with our friends, but also those who are not our friends at the moment. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. And I look forward to seeing you all again very soon. And I'd like to say thank you also to all the participants who've joined us online. Thank you very much. Stay well, stay safe. Bye-bye.